Welcome to Caribbean Rhythms, episode 110. I have on show today one of most famous historian and colorful thinker on strategy of our time. He need no introduction to most of you, Dr. Edward Luttwak. Dr. Luttwak, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yes, I understand that most people want to talk to you about geopolitics and such thing. But before we get to that, I know you have some unusual opinion about animal, which is animal long concern of mine. I understand, for example, you do not like dog.
No, I like cows.
Yes.
I am the proud owner of many cows,
Yes.
and I admire what cows can do, transforming little blades of grass into leather, into horn, into milk, and into meat. And if you think about it, these are the four things one needs to live on Earth.
Yes.
Nice leather clothes, much better lasting, and horn, to make weapons, of course, and the milk and meat is the sufficient eating. And the cow meat has, by the way, every single mineral and vitamin you need. So if you ate nothing but red cow meat, you'll be perfectly healthy. So I love cows and I hate dogs. Why? Because when I was visiting the Finnish army during the winter training, and when a temperature goes below 35 degrees centigrade officially, but measured, you're not allowed to be outside the tent. Yeah. So I was blocked by such a period for more than a day and really 30 hours or so. And the only thing we could do in the tent was to observe the wolves that were running around in this part of northeast Lapland. And the wolves are entirely independent. They are so dignified. As soon as the wolf would appear, they would immediately look for the little tiny rises in those plains and stand on it and proclaim its presence proudly and so on. And to transform this clever, self-independent animal into a slavish beggar is something that I think is a horrible degradation. And I hate dogs, and I hate those who make dogs and keep dogs and like dogs.
Yes, domestication is a terrible thing. Of what you say,
terrible.
It reminds me what you say of one of my favorite thinker, Konrad Lorenz, and he noticed that domesticated animal compared to the wild species share certain unusual traits with human, and he had theories that humans have been self-domesticating. This is terrible prospect if true. I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, I don't, but I approve of self-domestication of humans. I prefer a domesticated human to a savage human that would go, would pee all over the place and do stuff like that. But in animals, it is terribly inappropriate, particularly in regard to the dogs. You see, anybody who observes wolves.
Yes.
And I believe there are documentaries to that effect. Observed wolves sees the elegance, the dignity, the cleverness, because when they chase, they have to establish one line going straight and the other has to curve around to catch the prey. The curvers have to run faster than the straight guys. And the way they organize the team to put the older people straight and the younger ones on the curve, and they do it instantly without any bossing around, just teamwork. It's just highly admirable. Wolves are highly admirable individually for aesthetic reasons, but in groups because of the way they operate.
Yes, no, it's very impressive. So your love of wolf make you dislike dog, but what is this about cow? You own cows.
The cow is not. It's again not philosophical, but what happened is that I wanted to have a ranch. And primarily to be able to ride horses and spend time, out in nature riding horses. Yes. And then in order to pay, I got my ranch in the Amazon and so on. In order to pay, the only way to pay a ranch is to keep cows on it. And when the males are old enough, you sell the males, and then you eventually change the bulls every few years. and so I did it purely as a way of making money because, as you well know, the word capital is actually derived from the French cheptel, which means a herd of cows.
Yes.
Cheptel is a herd of domesticated animals, but usually it's cows. And while you're asleep, they reproduce. The cow becomes pregnant in her second year. So
Yes.
in the second year, the cow is pregnant. That product of that pregnancy, if female, will then be pregnant in second year. You can work out the numbers that this is the natural functioning of capital. You're asleep, but your money is reproducing. That
Yes.
is the whole basis of capitalism. So while deducing and thinking and inferring about these things, I was exposed to the spectacle of the cows themselves. And if anybody sees my cows on my ranch any evening, they will fall in love with cows because what they do is they have to make a descent to a lake in order
Yes.
to drink extensively after their day of hard work, of eating, ruminating, and so on. So, and the way they do it is that groups of 80, 90 cows follow uh, a single heifer and who emerges as a kind of natural leader, and they complete silence, in total complete silence, they descend to the lake in
Yes.
this silent procession, all very aligned with no quarreling or fighting and so on. And there is such a beatitude in their calm descent to the lake that anybody who sees the spectacle will immediately fall in love with cows.
This very beautiful. What kind cow, if I may ask? What breeds you
Now, the
use?
only kind you can have in the Amazon are cows which are the Indian cow, the humped cattle,
Yes.
which originally, centuries ago, the Portuguese brought from the colony of Goa to the colony of Brazil.
Yes.
Although the particular cows I have, which are exactly the same, they are the products of a visitation in the 1960s of a group of enterprising Brazilians who went to South India, and instead of having just the any old descendants of Portuguese cows, whatever, I mean cows from Goa, from India, they went and selected beautiful animals and made a breed called Nellore. Nellore is the same humped Indian cattle, rather thin compared to Western and all that. It's the same species exactly, but it's not degenerated and picked from the best possible specimens they found in South India. And they're called Nellore, and now there are probably 100 million Nellore in Brazil and Bolivia.
Yes.
And
Do
my
you?
cows are Nelores, and the Nelores are relatively narrower animals. They're not so heavy, but they naturally resistant to all the problems in the Amazon because they are tropical themselves.
Yes.
And they give birth naturally with none of the chains and traction that ranchers use to give birth of these animals which have been overbred, which have been bred to be big.
Yes.
So they're born big, so they can't have natural births. And moreover, my cows only eat grass, and
Yes.
the cows happen to be pure herbivores. So the fact that they systematically give them cereal proteins, concentrates, they call them, supplements, puts them, yes, they become fatter, that's true, but they also go into acidosis
Yes.
because they can't really digest it properly, which means they lose their immune system. And that's why when you visit a European or North American cow, there's a veterinarian strip next to it where it's held with this injection, that injection for blue nose, for yellow tongue, or whatever it's called, all these infirmities that arise from feeding something else to a pure herbivore.
Yes.
They can't even tolerate alfalfa. It's a pure herbivore. So when you
Yes.
give it only grass, or you don't give it anything, you let it find its own grass and walk around, it is an incredibly healthy animal, partly because they die by the age of 15. And as you know, very few humans would die by the age of 15, except for infantile diseases that
Yes.
my
Yes.
cows don't have.
No, it's very good that you raise them this way. Can I ask you, do you eat their own flesh yourself? Do you eat your own cows?
Well, as a matter of fact, I can't because the we do not have electricity on the ranch because it's a true Amazonic ranch designed to give not the frantic chasing after maximizing productivity and all these stupid things that in the end don't really work. So I don't have electricity. I have no refrigeration. So the
Yes.
only time I could eat a cow, and it has happened, is when I have a lot of visitors descending at the same time. Because then I can kill the cow, and then, of course, since I can't hang it to rot the way all the beef that everybody eats, which is pre-rotted beef, it is naturally very. I have to boil it and boil it and boil it and boil it, and you get boiled meat, and will
Yes.
still be a bit tough by your standards. So I don't actually eat what we eat all the time a piranha because
Yes.
piranha is a wonderful white fleshed fish, tastes like seafood, not like carp or river fish. It's got a wonderful taste, and they're very easy to catch and very abundant. As a matter of fact, once going with my wife and daughter an evening canoeing just with a paddle with no engine, you bump into them, they jump up, and half of them jump in the boat. I came back with maybe 10 pounds of piranha just because we went out at night to see the stars.
Yes, you
So
can still get.
piranha, wonderful fish, delicious, and the little ones you actually fry and you eat them whole because the bones become crystallized. The big ones you would cook exactly the way you cook high grade seafood because they're identical. See, they don't eat vegetables; they don't have the muddy taste. They only
Yes, they
eat
have.
other fish. You know.
In Brazil, it's easy to get piranha soup in many places. The reason I asked you about eating the cow is because you mentioned the hump on the tropical Indian cow. I don't know
Yes.
if you have you tried in Brazil the so-called
Well,
cupim. It's
The humps are only on the bulls.
yes,
And
but
we do not have, and
they
we would only ever eat the bull if a bull dropped dead,
I see.
because we do not actually. Bulls are in places like Europe, Argentina, United States. People go to bull auctions. They pay up to $1 million or whatever it is because they do artificial insemination. We don't do artificial insemination. We don't have refrigeration to do that. We don't do it, and so our bulls wander around, enjoy themselves by having. I mean, I dare to mention sexual relations with other cows, with cows. I mean, and so one every because the cow becomes pregnant in 2 years, and its daughter will then become pregnant in 2 years. We have to change the bulls, which means
Yes,
that we take the bulls and we change them with a ranch far away, which is 200 kilometers away, and we exchange them bull for bull. We don't go like to bull auctions and buy $1 million bulls, and we just say 10 bulls for 10 bulls. Unless they're, reasonably, they have to be reasonably the same age, or, fairly young, not very old, and not, that's it.
yes,
So we never actually end up with access to bulls
yes,
to eat the bull unless it drops dead on the ranch, in which case, of course, one eats it and it's very good meat too.
yes. It's just the hump, the barbecued hump, is one of most delicious things. But I haven't really
The
seen it
barbecue
being.
hump of a bull, which is well fed, consists of animal fat,
Yes,
and it tastes and is exactly the same as the camel hump fat, which of course I ate, although it was not the dromedary, it was the actual camel I ate in Kazakhstan. The actual, but it is just fat. It's animal fat, and it has that good flavor that you can eat once a year and enjoy. Like the Christians eat pig, as I'm told that they eat pork, and they enjoy pork fat to
yes,
eat grilled pork fat. And I looked at it, and it's very similar, but the camel fat you can eat is kosher, so I've tried that. And the bull fat would be, but it never happened that we had a bull drop dead that we ate.
yes. No, Dr. Luttwak, I want to ask you just if I may, is this in Brazil or in Bolivia? I don't know if you can say what country this ranch is in, but I am very interested in this Amazon region. Do you have? I have heard rumors. I don't know. Do you mind talking about this?
Well, no, I mean the Bolivian the Amazon, the actual Amazon region divides not politically but in two kinds of regions. Is the region where there is savanna with big islands of rainforest jungle, and then there are the regions which are closer to the equator, which are not savanna with islands of jungle, but jungle with islands of savanna in there. That is, there is rainforest, and then inexplicably, the rainforest just stops for a while and creates an island, a big island, if you look at it from a overhead, of
Yes.
savanna. Okay, and I am exactly at the border between these two areas. That is where savanna zones with islands of jungle give way to jungle with islands of savanna.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter the jurisdiction, they're all the same. They're all characterized by two important things. The first one is that because of the prevalence of insects, powerful insect life, the population is low.
Yes.
It's a low population. Insects preserve the Amazon much better than Amazon protection societies do. And whenever you read that people have cut down the rainforest to plant, they're always referring not to the rainforest, but to subtropical areas
Yes.
near rainforest, but not the full deal. I am in the area where not a single tree has been cut, and there's just savanna.
Yes.
But we have islands of rainforest that nobody would dream cutting, and so on. Not because we're so environmental or ecologist or whatever. It's simply because at the present moment in the marketplace, you can buy 100. You can buy a
Yes.
hectare, which is 2.4 acres um, of uh, of savanna for about $200, and it costs $300 to clear an hectare of rainforest. With
Yes.
current fuel prices, because of the war, is probably $500. So rainforest is more expensive than savanna. So anybody who cuts down the rainforest to make savanna is an idiot, unless he's operating under particular regimes. Because as you know, the perversity of states is infinite, and for a long time, the Brazilian law incentivized cutting rainforests because you could deduct rainforest cutting costs, which you set yourself, from your general taxes. So cutting rainforests was considered a good thing in itself, tax deductible. A lot
Yes.
of the Amazon destruction was caused by the tax deductibility rate. In other words, you run a business in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and you go and you tell the tax man that you have spent $1 million destroying rainforest, and they allowed you to deduct it from your taxes because it was a national aim to convert quote useless rainforest into usable land. So
Yes.
this perversity went on and on and on. Alongside the other famous Brazilian perversity, I don't know how much you know about Brazil, but it's the pension system. Pension
Yes.
system whereby most people in Brazil live and die without pensions and so on, and old people wander around begging. But people like bureaucrats, professors, bank employees have fantastically great pensions that
Yes.
begin very early and are very high. As a matter of fact, the pension fund of the Central Bank of Brazil, Central
Yes.
Bank, I don't mean banks present in a million places, Central Bank, it's just a
Yes.
relatively small number of people who have to manage, like the Federal Reserve, right? The Federal Reserve has it doesn't have a pension fund of its own, it's a government thing, but in Brazil, it has their own pension fund. It's a major holder of capital because they have such gigantic pensions. At the University of Sao Paulo, the guy who gets a job, teaches at the university, retires at age 42, and has a lifetime pension. So
Yes.
the perversity of the Brazilian state is manifest in two places, the pension system and the Amazon. And about the pension system, I don't really care, but I do care about the Amazon
Yes.
because it is largely destroyed because of government action. Where
Yes.
the government doesn't incentivize cutting the rainforest, nobody cuts the rainforest because it's damn difficult and expensive.
Yes, Brazil, I lived there many years actually, and it's very perverse overall. Their voting system, voting is mandatory or you don't get social
Yeah, right,
security.
right.
And this leads to massive open voter fraud. I was present where owner of some bakeries with he claimed several hundred or 1,000 employees, was selling his votes to some congressional
Right.
deputy, so forth. It's a very perverse system. The reason I asked you about location of ranch is just this.
Have you been to Rondônia? Have you been to Rondônia?
I have, and I've heard horror stories, Dr. Luttwak, about property owners there, about the local Indians, the local government, about squatters. This is why I ask about location of ranch. I mean, you don't have to say,
That's
but
correct. So
are
the
you
answer
happy?
is that I am not in Rondonia, but I am in another country, which I will not mention, which is Spanish speaking, not Portuguese speaking, and
Yes,
which has the sublime virtue that it does not police or administer its Amazonic territories.
yes,
So you're operating in an environment where there's no administration, there's no police. The law and order is of a very high standard because it's sustained by the fact that all the communities are small and
yes,
stable. There are no migrations and so on. So you have 700 people living in this little town. They all
yes,
know each other. They know each other's parents, uncles, cousins, and so on. And if somebody lies or misbehaves or steals in that town, they have to leave
yes,
and they have to go to one of the big cities because they cannot stay there. So when you have stable societies with no immigration in, no migration out very much, they operate, they have to be in a social relationship to each other. And that is why I can say that in 19 years of ranching, I've never lost a cow. I don't know how many thousands of my cows have wandered beyond my property over the years because the plants tear down the fences. You know, the Amazonic
yes,
growth tears down fences. So we are always repairing the fences, but there's always gaps. And what happens is you don't do anything to recover your cows that is wandered off because what happens is that once a year there's a big kind of fair, and all the managers of the different ranches go through all their cows and they return the cow according to its, we brand them according to the brand.
yes.
So
I,
it is an area where people wander around without guns, and if there is any kind of misbehavior, then everybody comes out with their shotgun because we all have shotguns, and we go after them and we execute them. We have never
yes,
knowingly handed over anybody to the legal authorities, although
yes,
it has happened. It has happened when they did it right in the middle of town because there is no police force as such, but there is a mayor
yes.
and so on. So if it were killed, then it would be conveyed to the nearest town that has a court, which is several hundred kilometers away with no asphalt.
Yes. No, but this is very
It's
good.
ripio. Ripio. Ripio is
Eh,
a word you must have encountered in Rondonia. It's that red, rocky, glamorous soil that it provides a decent road surface.
Yes. What you're describing is some kind of self-organized community.
Yes, it has to be
And
because the state is absent. You
yes,
see,
and
the state is absent, and therefore the only two. That is the reason why, for example, there is a huge amount of drug trade in Bolivia, and in Paraguay there is a huge amount of drug trade,
yes,
and there are the no crime except in very circumscribed areas. And in
yes,
Colombia, because Colombia is so much richer, so much more advanced, I mean, to go from where I am to go to Colombia is practically like going to downtown Manhattan. Because of places like that, then the drug trade is violent. Is
yes,
violent because they do cartels, monopolies, and things like that. In Amazonic conditions, some of my best friends are people who also have a sideline in smuggling drugs, but there's no violence and there's no
yes,
drug-connected violence at all. And in
yes.
fact, you can see that the drug trade is present, heavily present in different countries, but the criminality is limited to places which are relatively advanced, like Mexico or Colombia.
Yes. Before we go to break, it is just this that I wanted to ask you because you describe this beautiful, self-organizing, stateless community, and it reminded me of what you just said about the pack of wolves on the hunt which organize again spontaneously by nature somehow, or your herd of cows. And I wanted to ask you maybe a slight philosophical question. Do you think that man also has this type of monarchical instinct or some type of natural self-organization instinct that perhaps the state perverts?
Anyway, listen. Early on, one reason why I stayed there all these years as I get older and all that is that I have very good, really warm relations with people, very close relations there. But also because people have been impeccable in the treatment of an absentee guy who shows up 2 or 3 times a year. Now with COVID, of course, I didn't go for a long time and just was there last month. But even without COVID, I would come a few times a year and so on. And my property was entirely safeguarded and protected by the community.
Yes.
And that's because early on, we had a problem, as a matter of fact, with cattle thieves who came from an adjacent country with aluminium boats with powerful outboards. And they would come and steal our cows, load them on these aluminium boats, and take them away. So when I first arrived there, I got some cheap Ruger rifles, 22s, 22s, not big calibers. Gave it to the campesinos, which is the Indians who live on the ranch. And that's another deal. Another reason why there's so little violence and tension is because the deal is this. When you go and work for a ranch, you don't stand there and being ordered this and that, do this and that. No, you go there with your family, your children. You raise as many chicken and pigs and goats as you want, and then you use your machete to plant the plantains and to yucca and whatever, and then you do the few things the rancher wants from you. One of them is to ride the fence and to see where the fence needs to be fixed, and you fix the fence. And the other thing is that once a day you have to go to a shed where there are the sacks of salt and open up the sacks and put them out so the cows can eat them, because every known bovine door is salt and there's always one more salt. So
Yes.
working for a rancher means living on his property and using as much of his land as you care. Of course, you don't have a tractor, so you can only use an acre or two, and raise all the animals and live there, and you get paid a modest pay, a small pay, you get paid, and you're free use of all this land, of course, to do only two things. Fix the fence, the section of fence to the next guy taking over another, 10 miles away, and once a day take sacks of salt from A to B. That's it. And
Yes.
that kind of thing does not generate a feudal relationship, because is the same as we have with our cows. We don't do animal husbandry of taking the cow, moving the cow, shuffling the cow, milking the cow. Now,
Yes.
they live there, and we do roundups. Every 6 months, you do a roundup. That's it. The rest of the time, they wander around, reproduce, and all that stuff. So
Yes.
how humans are treated and animals are treated are very similar.
Yes.
When visitors come to a ranch and I take them and we come to the places where the campesinos are living, with this kind of very simple house and very minimal things and so on and so forth, they find the only thing that they have a high frequency radio that costs several $100s, because that's the only way to communicate, because there's no electricity and cellular service hasn't arrived really beyond the little town there.
Yes.
And they're living on their own. They're cooking, they're living there, they have a place and so on. And when you visit them, they're doing their own thing for their own purposes. And they execute these two functions, and that's it. So, of course, their
Yes.
pay is very low, but it is really pocket money because they're feeding themselves and all that stuff. And also, they're producing things for sale. Like plantains are typically they're taken carried with a mule, will be carried to a place where somebody collects the plantains and sells them for money in a faraway
Yes.
city.
Well, this is very good. Self-organizing primitive government by nature. Dr.
That's
Luttwak.
correct. But of course, you cannot have crowding. You
Yes.
cannot. This doesn't. If humans live in unnatural agglomerations these metropolis, okay,
Yes.
places like New York City and so on, there's no actual civilized way to live in New York City. Not no, not even if you have a helicopter and you fly in and out from the Hamptons, it's still not really civilized because you can't. Human beings, once they're stuffed, you put too many rats in a cage.
Yes.
They start behaving exactly like the people in New York City.
No, it is awful. I want to ask you more about this. I believe Europe is overpopulated. People don't agree with me. Do you mind, however, if we take a short break? We can have a smoke break or this, and we will be right back.
Okay, fine. Right back.
Very good.
Bye bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Welcome back to show. I have here Dr. Edward Luttwak. It's great honor. Dr. Luttwak, welcome back to show. I wanted to ask you about Sicily. It's long been concern of mine. I have several shows on matters Sicily history. I know you have special relationship with this island. Do you care to talk this?
Well, I had the immense privilege that when I was 5 years old, my father, mother, and two brothers, all of us moved to Palermo, Sicily, because this was a long time ago. It was, let's say, January 1st, 1948, more or less. And my father had lost, we left Romania when I was born in Pennsylvania and left behind all his property. He didn't have a house. He liked to rent and none, but he owned warehouses in Costanza, warehouses in Arad and Brasov and so on. And he owned railway wagons. He was the owner of private railway wagons, and he left it all because of the arrival of the communist regime. And we left just before. If they hadn't left then, we would have been trapped for years. Well, perhaps not because he would have crossed the border anyway, and then he decided to move to Palermo, Sicily, because he had this idea that as a refugee who didn't speak Italian, had no papers, that only in Palermo he could be successful. And he was very fast by simply buying green oranges on a tree and waited till they ripened. When they ripened, he had people with little hammers and little nails making crates. He put the oranges in the crates and sent them to England, where the National Health Service was just starting up, and the was buying oranges to give to pregnant women and children. And as you know, there are not too many orange trees in England, so they had to import them. Spain was then under complete economic embargo, uh, so there was no Spanish citrus. The only
Yes.
citrus in practice was Italian citrus, and all of it came from I mean, the good one came from Sicily, of course, the high quality, and the Palermo, Western Sicily was the citrus land more particularly. So he did it all, and all he had to do was to avoid paying money to the mafia, which he did easily enough, and refused to pay them a cent. So he made a lot of money very fast. All of these are things I didn't know at the time since I was a 5 year old. What I knew is that my parents had brought me to paradise, sheer paradise, because first of all, we lived in Palermo and we would go to Mondello, the beautiful beach of Mondello, gorgeous beach, wonderful beach, framed by a mountain on
Yes.
the right, a mountain on the left, and top. Mondello, by the way, is the place where ice cream was invented. Ice cream was invented because of the coincidence of the Madonia Mountains, which have a lot of snow every winter, and they developed the technology of snow pits in the middle about 1200 in the Middle Ages, and they would put this ice together with ripe fruit. And to this day, only in Sicily you can eat ice cream, and I spit on the ice cream everywhere else in the world because what they do in Sicily, they get ripe fruit and then they put it with the snow and then turn it together and there's no and then a little bit of milk, no sugar added, absolutely delight. But that requires ripe fruit. It requires and people serious about ice cream. So whenever people offer me ice cream, the famous place, you pay extra and this and that. It's always unspeakably bad, and I never touch it. Of course, I now avoid sugar because I'm very old, but even long before that. So we had wonderful ice cream, we had wonderful beaches, we had wonderful weather. We were outdoors most of the time. And at the same time, we lived in the heart of Palermo. My parents could walk to the opera, which is very important to them as good Central European Jews. They were real, one of the religious things was music. There was the Politeama Concert Hall, which in those days, um, it was all sustained by big landlords,
Yes.
princes, marquises, and so on that that had a lot of money, and they supported these cultural institutions. For real,
Yes.
they would go to the opera, and I heard Yehudi Menuhin flying in from London in 1948.
Yes.
And this was also, it was the feudal Sicily, which was destroyed by the land reform, which destroyed, of course, the cultural institutions and the elegance sustained by that. And so it was a beautiful city, notably elegant, in a wonderful setting with the mountains behind, on the side, the water, and everything else. And I loved my school. I went to the state elementary school across the street from where I was living. All the proper people in Sicily would send their children to boarding schools in Tuscany, the rich. And I mean, the rich were the aristocratic. So let me put it: the aristocrats would send them to Tuscany so they wouldn't speak Sicilian, but Tuscan, that is
Yes.
Italian. And but my parents were enthusiastic about Sicily, absolutely enthusiastic. And they wanted me to learn Sicilian, so they sent me to the school across the street. So I grew up with the children of the people who could afford to live in the expensive part of Palermo, but who were not aristocratic. So
Yes.
guess who they are? They were, of course, mafia people. There were some businessmen, but any businessman who wasn't poor would send his children again to boarding school away. So it was me and the children of the mafia, but the mafia bosses did not send the children to boarding school. So I grew
Yes.
up with wonderful people in wonderful conditions, and it was great. So, and the tragedy of my life is that my father developed a perverse passion for industry. As a matter of fact, the horrible industry, PVC, polyvinyl chloride. So in 1950, he started being interested, and in 51, tragically, I lost Palermo. and they moved me from paradise of Palermo to the hell of Milano, foggy, rainy, full of Milanese, and they would make fun of my Sicilian. I would punch them and break their noses because that always makes a big impression, with the blood and everything. But it's actually not serious at all. But that's a right thing to do. So I got kicked out of school, and then I went to another school, and I spoke Sicilian. They spoke Milanese. They made fun. I broke their nose. I got kicked out of the second school. Then my parents had to send me to boarding school in England. And in boarding school in England, when you're bullied and you break somebody the nose of a bigger boy, that's considered praiseworthy. Praiseworthy. You don't because it means you're not going whining to your teachers. So exactly the same behavior that got me kicked out of school in Milano accelerated my career in school career in England, even though I didn't speak a word of English. And that itself was a strange thing because my mother spoke very good English because she had gone to school in Timișoara, Romania, had taken English as her third or fourth language, and that was good enough for her, given the level of the Timișoara school where she went. Is that many years later, when she arrived in London, she would go to see Henry V, and she was probably the only person in the audience, other than a random professor, who actually understood every word of Henry V, including the prologue
Yes.
where they explain the war because of the Salic law. And these days in British theaters, they go through the prologue very, very fast in a formalistic way or drop it completely because people don't even know those words. But my mother in Timișoara had learned it in class, so she knew it. But nevertheless, she did not teach me English, and they didn't see me as somebody who would go to England or America or something like that, as they themselves did not think for a moment of doing that. In fact, when my
Yes.
father died, my mother emigrated immediately, but she emigrated to Israel. They were not really oriented towards that sort of thing, because, my father had actually been to New York in 1938, and he was appalled by the vulgarity of everybody. Everybody was vulgar. The poor were vulgar. The bourgeoisie was vulgar. The rich were vulgar. And he despised the idea that he would be in a place like New York. So
Yes.
in London, he had never been to know my mother. So,
I
they
wanted.
probably, instead of despising the British were despised. When I went to England, despising foreigners was simply the premise. You despise foreigners for being foreigners. So
Yes.
Americans did not despise the foreigners. Most of them were foreigners themselves. But on the other hand, there was the vulgarity, the unbelievable vulgarity,
Yes.
Uh, so
Yes. No, this may be still problem in. But I wanted to ask you your experiences in a mafia school and so forth with
it
mafia
wasn't a
students.
mafia school. It was a Palermo school, okay? It's just a sociological fact that the
The
Palermo
Palermo.
school, it was not in the bourgeois part of Palermo. It was in
Yes.
a very rich part of Palermo, which is rather small. Via Villa Reale and all that area was a very small thing. And it so happened that because it was indeed upper class, when I went to elementary school, I could not go with the children of my neighbors because they were all in college, in boarding schools in Tuscany and so on, so they would speak proper Italian. Hence, the
Yes.
people who were there who could both afford to live in central Palermo and
Yes.
who were not aristocratic were the kind of people who were heavily involved, and therefore there were mafia rules in the school. Like, for example, uh, we could uh, we could fight and break noses outside the school, but we could not do within the school because within the school, if you broke a nose, then an elder brother would come in, and then another elder brother would come in, and then it would escalate to the parents, and there'd be a shootout. So we learned arms control, like age 6. You learned arms control. That is, you had to limit your use of force because
Yes.
of these extraneous factors. And of course, but we also learned violence because we were free to fight kids outside the school. And so we were lived in Via Villareale and we patrolled Via Villareale outside school hours. We will not allow anybody from another area to come to Villa Villareale to play in Via Villareale. We had a bit of a park there, and we did not allow anybody who didn't belong to via Villarreal to use the little park, period. And if they came, you had to fight. And we
Yes.
therefore, but we didn't organize a gang because we had a soccer team. We had our own street soccer team, and which functioned as a gang when the gang was necessary. When it wasn't, it was a soccer team.
Yes. No, your experiences there, however, they affected how you think generally about strategy and so forth later.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, it's also conditioned me to something else, which is probably untrue and unfair. But whenever I read writings and disquisitions about war and peace written by people who have never used a weapon in their lives, I find it very, very difficult to be properly respectful to their reason. I always suspect
Yes.
them for not really knowing it because they never fought. They never
Yes.
used a weapon. They never shot at anybody. They
Uh,
never got shot. Why are they talking about war and peace?
You are adept with the stiletto. You have used this tool, the stiletto, before.
Well, yes, but that has nothing to do with Palermo because we were really small children. We had
Yes.
used no stilettos, and we're not stiletto types. And absolutely not connected with Sicily. Zero.
Yes.
The reason
Yes.
I use the stiletto is because I've been traveling around the world and doing many different things. And if you know how to use a stiletto, it goes a long way. And you need it. But in Sicily, we were practicing violence and arms control. And given our age, there was no question of using either a blade or a gun or anything of the sort. And
Yes.
I never, saw a gun. The only person who uh, was was a person who had a high disposition for dealing with gun violence and all that kind of stuff that I knew was actually one of my father's partners. Because when my father arrived, he didn't speak Italian. He spoke Romanian, and Romanian is quite close to Italian, and he spoke French, which is close to Italian. But he engaged in business from the first day he arrived, and therefore this type of language is not sufficient. He needed a more precise language. So he recruited himself a kind of a very well educated person who spoke German as well as Italian. And this person was a fellow who always traveled with a gun and a knife. And the reason he did was because he was a commercial traveler selling watches, like Omega watches and so on. So he
Yes.
was driving around Sicily with a car full of expensive watches. And he therefore was, subject to possible robberies in areas where the mafia didn't have proper control of crime. And Western Sicily usually is fine, but Eastern Sicily, the mafia was very weak, mostly absent, in fact. It's a Western
Yes.
Sicilian problem. And therefore, this guy, who was my father's partner, so when I would ride in his car, which I sometimes did, sitting in the back, my feet would run into his weapon. He would put the weapons there, and so, but it was not. It, absolutely no childish background in that. I
Yes.
got into weapons when I was in boarding school in England, and we were all in the cadet corps from age 13, and you got the 22 rifle, and then from age 16, at that time the British Army had soldiers from age 16. We were not in the British Army; we were cadets in the Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, like if Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire like infantry. We were
Yes.
cadets, and by the age of 16, you got the rifle, a proper rifle, and I had
Yes.
A Lee Enfield rifle, which was then the standard rifle, bolt action rifle, with a magazine holding 7 rounds,
Yes.
and so I was introduced, and the stiletto the same because then I was moved to a different unit. Airline did whatever it was called, vaguely commando. So we got the typical stiletto, which is the British commando interpretation of very narrow, a very narrow knife with the point, the counts is the point, not the size. You're not going to use it to chop a tree. You're just going to stab somebody with it. And we were taught stabbing, which is an art, of course.
Yes. I want to ask you about modern warfare and modern such tools and how they will change world. But if we could leave that for later, because on subject of Sicily, this matter of Sicilian history, I talk on this show before about John Julius Norwich and his book on the Normans in the south of Italy and so forth. I know you don't like him. You don't like Norwich, I hear. And
No, because I mean, his Byzantine writings, which is, I mean, I envy the fact he made a lot of money with his Byzantine books, but they're worthless. He put together stories and anecdotes. He's like historian of the Herodotus type. If he hears a good story, he puts it in whether it's true or not, and he makes no effort to determine if it is true or not.
yes,
Norwich reproduces absurd things, like, for example, the tale of the Bulgar killing emperor who blinded the prisoners and sent them back. It's all kinds of mythologies and lies,
I
and
see.
no excuse for Norwich to have it.
Yes, but
By the time he wrote these books, there was a decent historiography, historiographical materials and documentations and so on. So, therefore, I would never spend 10 seconds reading about the Normans because there's a very fine literature on the Normans. Very
yes,
fine, outstanding characters they were. 1,000 of them arrived in the same year, 1066, that Normans landed in England. They landed in Greece. I mean, in Sicily. They
yes,
came from Calabria, about 1,000 of them. But of course, we shouldn't count them as men. We should count them as tanks because there were 1,000 horsemen with, big men on big horses with armor, buckle, and something. And they pushed the Arabs out of Sicily and shoved them back to North Africa and then ruled Sicily. And nobody knows why or how or from what whence. The fact is that these horsemen, Norman horsemen, who after all were nothing but Vikings 2 generations back, who had
yes,
originated in what is now northwest France, who had arrived there, nobody knows how the hell they did it, but they had very superior ideas about government. They operated a very, very effective government that collected very little taxes, very few little money to provide high levels of security. And they they completely invented the idea of pluralism, cultural pluralism, because Norman Sicily, it was a place where laws were redacted in Latin and Greek and Arabic and
yes,
many regulations in Hebrew as well, where the religions lived together side by side. That's why the Pope hated them terribly, and which therefore Sicily was open to sea traffic from the Muslim world, from everywhere in the Mediterranean, without exception, and they became very rich and advanced. And Palermo was during the Hohenstaufen centuries, where, let's say, talk like the the 1000 to 1200 to late 1200, from 1250 years, Palermo was the biggest city, the richest city in Europe,
yes,
and terribly successful, all under Norman governance. And how these simple guys who arrived with their horses and swords had all these great ideas, I don't know. And I've read literature and I still don't know. And there's the fact that they understood that in Sicilian conditions, pluralism meant having open ports and becoming very rich without taxing. See, they didn't tax
yes,
because they was all paid through port fees. Import, it was simply custom fees, which are notoriously much easier to collect because there always is a limited number of ports and cargo categories, and they took very little money. And in fact, in all subsequent centuries, whenever a new regime started in Sicily, the demand was always that they would continue the good practices of our Norman kings. And unfortunately, the Sicily has suffered ever since because and it's always been misgoverned, and is misgoverned as we speak.
Yes, the Hohenstaufens were eventually kicked out of Sicily.
Yeah, but remember, the
And
Hohenstaufens followed the Normans. First, it was the Normans, who
yes,
are these
yes,
northern guys who came and who built the government system. The genius of Frederick II Hohenstaufen is upon taking over the Norman system, he didn't change it. He
yes,
didn't
yes.
apply the Holy Roman Empire system or the Italian commune system or the French system. He allowed the continuation of this sort of very simple form of government that was simple and effective.
Yes, no, this is true. But as you point out, that system was eventually removed when there was massive war against the heirs of Frederick Hohenstaufen.
Yeah, well,
And
The Pope
yeah,
called Frederick the Viper. Why?
yes,
Because of tolerance. Because he tolerated the Orthodox, the Greek who had separated. By that time, the Greek Church had doctrinally separated from Catholicism, and he
yes,
tolerated. All of Eastern Sicily was Orthodox, and he completely accepted them. Not just tolerate them under the carpet. I mean, he had pluralism, true pluralism. He
yes,
published these laws and so on, and he made no laws that would offend either the Orthodox Church or the Muslims or the Jews. And in fact,
yes,
if in one of the splendiferous monuments left behind by the Normans is the Capella Palatina of solid gold mosaic, a whole building interior solid gold mosaic, and outside there is a dedication stone of a priest, a Catholic priest, to his mother, and which is written in Latin and written in Greek and in Arabic and in Hebrew. Why? Because his friends were, used all these languages. So Hohenstaufen, all he did is to continue those practices. But
yes,
Hohenstaufen was a sophisticated guy. He came from a sophisticated part of the world, Wendish from what is now Bavaria and through Italy. And Italy of the cities was very sophisticated. He was
yes,
sophisticated, but the system of government he got was from very simple people who got the genius from God knows where. In fact, there's no real explanation of how come these people set up this incredibly, inventing pluralism, then using pluralism as a solution to the problem of fiscal problem is a remarkable thing.
yes. No, but what I wanted to ask you about is when the system got removed in part by pressure from the Pope and then
No, the Pope, hating pluralism, procured the intervention of the cadet ruler, the Anjou, Charles d'Anjou, who
yes,
had nice monarchical affiliation with the King of France, but was a piss poor bastard cadet. And the Pope, invited Charles d'Anjou to go and destroy Frederick II. And Charles d'Anjou descended with his French things, and precisely because Frederick's regime was so effective and harmonious and successful, he didn't have a lot of military power because he didn't need power to repress his population. His population
yes,
adored him, hence he had very few
yes,
soldiers. So the Pope, the evil, the hatred of the Vatican for pluralism caused the destruction of the best regime there was in Europe, which was, of course, known in Latin as stupor mundis, the astonishment of the world, because people would come to Palermo and encounter this incredibly sophisticated, advanced society, which is now present in its monuments, which are still today the most ambitious architecture in Europe is still in Palermo, Sicily. To have an entire building, the entire Cathedral of Monreale, entirely covered in golden mosaics, not in which they have little sort of chambers telling the entire story from the Bible, and then the New Testament of the Christians, episode by episode, so that a priest could take a group of illiterate peasants and take them from one square to the other, and they would actually learn the whole contents of the Bible quite effectively. All of these things are
yes.
really they what survives proves that this was a regime that did not need a renaissance. That's the point. There would
Yes.
never been a renaissance because there'd never been a decay, a collapse of culture. And in
Yes.
Catania, at that time in Catania, they were reading and translating the Greek classics, translating them into Latin, reading them in the original. And in northern Italy, they did not know that. So the northern Italians nicely waited 300 years to discover the Greek classics via Venice and Byzantium. But in Sicily, they had them all along. So this is a case of a grotesquely underestimated culture, which was then misgoverned by ignorant Piemontese and all the rest of it. To this day, to this day, and eventually demoralizing the Sicilians. And Catania, they stopped. Uh, Catania decayed. They stopped reading the classics and all that stuff. So the classics were quote lost in 1300. Petrarch, the greatest intellectual in Italy, did not know Greek, and that could
Yes.
be recovered, from 1400 and so on. But Sicily always had them.
Yes. Just before we go to break, I wanted to ask you all along. So after this regime in Sicily got removed, eventually, however, there was vengeance on the part of the Hohenstaufen house through the Kingdom of Aragon, together with Byzantium, in the so-called Night of the Sicilian
Well,
Vespers.
that was not Hohenstaufen. Yeah, but not Hohenstaufen from Germany. It is the Frederick II's surviving son had married Bianca Lancia from Catania, of the Lancia family, and it was the Lancias that went to Byzantium, and the Palaiologos, Emperor Palaiologos, gave them gold. They used the gold to hire ships in Genoa. The ships were used to bring the troopers from Aragon to to invade Sicily, and at the same time as coinciding a revolt, the Sicilian Vespers, on the Vespers prayers time and so on, everybody came out to church with daggers and went and killed the French wherever they found them. This
Yes.
was the night of the Sicilian Vespers when the French were killed, whereupon Charles d'Anjou, from his headquarters in Naples, sends an army to reconquer Sicily from the rebels. But when his army is approaching Calabria, arrived the Aragonese. And the Aragonese swore that they would maintain the good system of the Normans, which had,
Yes.
of course, which is the Hohenstaufen that perpetuated. So the Aragonese came in, and they're not as conquerors, but invited by the Sicilian Lancia family, and the result is the Lancia di Trabia became the head of an aristocratic group of families that divided the island and kept it till 1947. Until 1947, the victors of the revolt to remove the Pope's Frenchmen, Charles d'Anjou, and all that, and to establish the Aragonese, the victors of that war owned the land in Sicily until 1947. I still know
Yes.
some of them, and some of them, at least a few of them, have kept their palaces, but they lost the land all around us. And but you know, uh, the Sicilian history was once known to every intellectual. When Goethe wrote his book about travel to Italy, his first thing is, if you don't go to if you go to Sicily first, Sicily is the place. Without Sicily, Italian history is Italy is nothing without Sicily. And then what
Yes.
happened is that in the decay, especially of Piemontese Sicily, Republicans, the Italian Sicily, Sicily has declined in some as a place. But people used to go to Palermo and set up shop in Palermo for the winter and so like Goethe did. The Italienische Reise of Goethe is a lot of it is in Sicily.
Yes, Sicily must be, I think, returned to these families that you mentioned. Dr. Luttwak, I think we need to go to break. We've been have a long segment. Do you have time to come back for another portion?
I only have time for a few more minutes, though,
Yes,
because
very
there are
good.
some people showing up
Yes,
here,
very good.
people arriving.
Yes, I
Okay.
understand. They are watching us. But yes, we will be right
No,
back.
no, and when are these people coming?
Welcome back to the show. I have here Dr. Luttwak, Edward Luttwak. Dr. Luttwak, I wanted to ask you about the future of warfare. I know you have written and thought much about this. I'll just be blunt with you. Do you see possibility for the rebirth of a glorious age of barbarism? I know you are not fan of barbarism, maybe, but I mean something on the order of new technologies that allow infantry, that allow special type soldiers to remake not just warfare, but social relationships in same way that bronze armor or compound bow on the steppe allowed there to be created new social movement. I don't mean movement, but social structures such as the Mannerbund, the Society of Warrior Brotherhoods, and so forth.
Well, look, I'll tell you what the war has shown is that the arrival of small man-portable weapons has enabled the conjunction, the partnership between the classic infantry, which is by its nature fluid, and which is not discrete. It's not like 10 tanks, 50 tanks or somebody. It could be like 10 people, 110 people, 110,000. The numerical fluidity of infantry, the inherent abundance of infantry, as opposed to tanks, let's say, or artillery, or aircraft, or warships, the abundance of infantry, the fluidity of infantry, the tactical fluidity of infantry, which is not sitting there for all to see the way a tank is.
Yes.
But which can hide under, can wear inconspicuous clothing, can hide behind the wall, can hide in a natural hollow in the ground, can make a hole for itself, can hide in the woods. So the fluidity of infantry And the weakness of infantry is that they walked around carrying puny rifles and things like that, or spears, rifles, puny rifles, when other people started having ballista, stone throwers, artillery, missiles, air power, armed helicopters that could range over the battlefield and hit everything they wanted and so on. And there was the infantry carrying around rifles. Okay,
Yes.
then only mid-century, last mid-century, it acquired bazooka. A bazooka is a weapon that, if you're super brave, super courageous, or willing to die, you can actually destroy something at maybe 70 meters, 80 meters, 200 feet, something like that. If you're very courageous and so on. And suddenly, the infantry keeps all its old virtues of abundance, fluidity, flexibility, and so on, but now they can have weapons that are terrifically powerful, which is anti-tank weapons, which are not a tube launching rocket. If you're very brave and you can approach to within yards of the tank, instead you have a missile. And moreover, it's a missile that was born as a wire guided missile. That was the German invention of World War II, wire guided, with a thin wire spooled out behind the rocket of the, behind the missile. It spools out a very, very, very thin wire, and you send instructions, go right, left, up, and down. You go from that to optical recognition systems that, in fact, enable you to elevate the weapon, see the target, and indicate, click, that this is my target. That thing that you see, mister, is the target. And then you walk away because the missile has acquired the target
Yes.
and it recognizes it as the tank. And what tank? A T-72/B/D. And that tank, it has a library of pictures of that tank seen from all possible perspectives. And therefore, you can walk away, drink a cup of coffee, and a missile on its way to destroy that tank. Now, the same thing can destroy an armed helicopter with much greater ease because there's a great big noisy machine on top of you. You just aim, shoot, and the helicopter is gone, gone. So
Yes.
everybody around the world who is now complaining about the very high cost of armed helicopters, they can save themselves the money because you can only use it against people who do not have access to any one of these higher quality anti-tank weapons, which are also anti-helicopter weapons, and which, by the way, if taken, let's say, into port, are anti-ship weapons. And so still the infantry, with all its virtues of fluidity, numerical economy, and mainly the fact that they can come by train, by foot, by motorcycle, and so on. Now they have weapons that can knock out tanks, knock out armed helicopters, and low-flying attack aircraft. In fact, if you go down the list of the Russian aircraft shot down in Ukraine, which is quite an impressive number, most of them are ground attack aircraft, which were once formidable emperors of the battlefield. You have something like an A-10 with its formidable cannon and ranging over, destroying, wiping out things. Now somebody hiding behind the wall launches a missile, and you're a goner. You're dead. So
Yes.
there's been an absolute rise of the empowered infantry. And that is why it's so annoying to me that the frigging Taiwanese, who have all the money in the world and 20 million people, don't raise an anti-invasion infantry that could easily wipe out any Chinese invasion. The whole Chinese army is less than a million. And if they got even 400,000 to land in Taiwan, the Taiwanese could kill them all. If they raised a militia, not the stupid army with all these decorated uniforms marching up and down they have, but a popular militia armed with anti-tank weapons, which are also anti-ship weapons and anti-aircraft weapons.
Why don't they do this? I know you've criticized them
They
and
don't
also
do
the
it because
Polish.
the Kuomintang generals, all of whom vote for the generals are all Kuomintang party. They all have their apartments for their retirement in communist China across the water in Xiamen. Okay,
I see.
they do not want to fight. When they have sort of feeble conscription, the conscripts are disgusted by their army because they use them on ridiculous fatigues and things and uniforms marching up and down. They themselves, uh, they have these uniforms loaded with medals and all that stuff. This is a traitorous, incompetent bunch of people. So the ruling presidency is held by the Taiwan Independence Party, but they haven't acted accordingly, which is
Yes.
to get rid of these people and get young Taiwanese determined to emulate the Ukrainians and defend their islands and drive off the Chinese with great ease, in a very relaxed way. They can wipe them out
Yes.
because as I say, the Chinese army is 400,000. There are 20 million Taiwanese, so that if they mobilize to that very modest and enjoyable level that the Finns are, the Finns that serve in the army, and then or the Swiss, at age 18 they go in, they learn a few things, they're smart kids, and then they remain in the reserves till age 45. If they
Yes.
copy the system of the Swiss and the Finns, they will be able to laugh off the Chinese. The Chinese can bomb them if they want to. They can bomb them, but they can't. I mean, with nuclear weapons and wipe them out, but they can't invade them, and they certainly can't use, for example, ground attack aircraft, armed helicopters, or amphibious landing, because
Yes.
they can afford. They have the money to buy these missiles that cost, which are expensive. They're
Yes.
not cheap. But the bazooka, I actually used the bazooka once. And that bazooka I had was something that probably cost $100.
Yes.
And these missiles cost $200,000, 150, stuff like
The,
that.
if I may interrupt, the Swiss and the Finns arguably still have powerful, effective national armies. I have many friends who are United States veterans or active duty. They tell me American military is largely lately turning into just a giant jobs benefits program for not very competent people. And that they believe future of warfare will be outsourced to small companies of private military contractor and so forth. I know you know a lot about this, and did you know Mad Mike Hoare or Bob Denard or these legendary mercenaries from 20th century? Would you care to talk
Now, the
about
only
that?
thing that I had encounters with the subsequent generation of these people. The original people, I I sort of they were operating way beyond their sell by date. When you buy a bottle of
Yes,
milk, there is a date sell by. They were operating way beyond that date. A lot of the stuff they did was farcical. I remember Margaret Thatcher's son got involved in a farcical Capo Verde, or no, Equatorial
Equatorial
Guinea, or
Guinea. Yeah.
something. Equatorial Guinea, because they had all the money in the world. They're a bunch of idiots, and they couldn't even do that. Okay,
Yes,
if I could have done Equatorial Guinea much better than they did, but they were drunken, incompetent people. Now,
yes,
in regard to the United States, in the United States, the real fighting has always been done by the Scotch Irish element and the elements that gravitate to that. For example, Jose Martinez, who crosses from Mexico, if he comes from the right region of Mexico, because in Mexico, like in Central America, the character of the population is determined by the character of the antecedent Indians. The
yes,
antecedent Indians, for example, in the well-named state of Guerrero, they were real fighters. Okay,
yes,
there were people who were very passive, like the miserable sort of populate like the Aztecs and so on, which were
yes,
slavish population and all that. And then there were fighting people. So Jose Martinez crosses the border and changes his name to Joe Martinez. Then he becomes Joe Martin. He joins the Marine Corps. He gets tattooed with a Marine Corps tattoo. He's a fighter. And we have the Scotch Irish, we have a certain kind of immigrants from places like Mexico, a few others who are there. But the urban, educated American population are, with the exception of few talented people with military backgrounds and so on, they are basically post-bellic people. They're post-heroic, and they are in the military to get paid. The military, of course, has all this absurd, diversity thing and all that kind of stuff,
yes,
which is, for example, women can be very good warriors. And I know because I'm married to one who is a woman and a warrior, a natural warrior. That
yes,
is to say, courageous and determined and so on. But but the women who serve in the American military often are people who are doing it just as a job. Now, that's fair enough because there are many functions in the modern military. In fact, not only the necessary, but the unnecessary over administration, over bureaucratization, too many stupid programs and this and that, public relations, no end, and all this other stuff. But there is a certain part of the female population that is very fit for combat, but they're a small part. But what's happened here is that serving in combat has become a right that you fight and you get. So when the guy becomes chief of staff of the Marine Corps, he's under immediate pressure to make people unsuitable females in combat positions as opposed
Yes.
to reserving the combat for suitable combat people, including suitable females, which exist really do exist. But
Yes.
the fact that you're forced to do it, and of course, that creates it's a very bad thing. Instead of allowing a natural flow of people, talents should flow where naturally they occur. So I actually would have been very much against the exclusion of women from combat units as a matter of principle, but I'm equally, or maybe even stronger, more strongly, to introduce them willfully in pursuit of this abstract aim, even when they are absolutely not combat capable, not combat worthy. They don't even have the physical strength to do the job you have to do.
Yes.
It's all very well modern weapons, but the fact is that you have to have strong arms. If you don't have strong arms, I don't care what your propensity is.
Yes.
So, it's one of those things. So, contractors coming back, well, contractors have never left. I've been a contractor myself. I've always existed. I had contracts, do them. I have them even quite recently, even quite very recently,
Yes.
just a few years back, the last one. And so contract has always existed, but it cannot be central. It was in history, it was only ever central in very brief periods like Renaissance Italy when the urban Italians of the Renaissance cities were just not willing to serve as soldiers. So that was there, and then Africa was, and now we have things like Wagner because of the Russian refusal to conscript youth, their youth into the armed forces. The Swiss are conscripted, the Russians are not.
Yes.
The Finns are conscripted, and now the Swedes, because the Swedes are serious people. When the Russians took Crimea, without any further ado, the prime minister at the time, who happened to be the head of a very left-wing coalition, and a female prime minister, super left-wing, goes to the Swedish parliament and says, well, you've all read the papers, so naturally we're restarting compulsory national service. And
I
thereupon
see.
there was a debate that lasted maybe less than 2 hours. And the only issue debated is, do we start immediately or do we first have an initial phase where we recruit selectively? We conscript selectively to form the corporals and sergeants to absorb the office. So that showed that Sweden has a national myth in good working order, which is the Kingdom of Sweden goes its own way. The Kingdom of Sweden defends itself, and the Swedes serve the Kingdom of Sweden. And that was that. The particular government that did it in 2016. Look at that. In
Yes.
America, there would have been. They were all walks. They were super walks, but they were also Swedes.
Yes.
So, so
But
what you have is that you need to have a military culture. However, the military culture is not always what you think it's going to be. Classic example is Israel. One of the reasons why American intelligence, you can look it up, it's online. CIA predicted that the state of Israel would last only a few weeks because everybody knows the Jews don't fight. Well, it turns out the Jews don't fight for other people. They fight very well for themselves. And equally, when I see the elite forces getting filled up with Hispanics, then I know that they are the right Hispanics. I know they can easily be the very right Hispanics who are made for this kind of stuff. But as I
yes.
say, it's not Mexicans who are
Well,
good in the forces. It's the Mexicans who come from those particular parts and cultures of Mexico that have always been warlike cultures with the
yes. I
warlike virtues.
I think even so, what you said earlier about the Scotch-Irish, I think they still form about 80% of America's combat
I don't know
troops.
what I don't know what percentage they form of the force. I know they are a very high percentage of the useful part,
Yes.
But there are
Yeah,
always exceptions. Always
yes, yes,
exceptions. I mean, for example, I know a bunch of people a group of people who transited through Goldman Sachs, went to university, went to Marine Force Recon, and after serving several years in Marine Force Recon, joined Goldman Sachs as merchant bankers. And they are very atypical people in every respect, but they are not individual exceptions or something. They come from a subcultures of subcultures. So
yes,
that's it. But what you cannot do is to say, oh well, we have to uh, exclude entire populations or include populations. To be
yes,
inclusive is destructive, very destructive. To be
yes. No, of
inclusive,
course. But I wanted to ask you
I saw
because
that in the 82nd Airborne. By the way, I went to visit at Fort Bragg, 82nd Airborne, and I
yes,
saw a group of these people in the 82nd Airborne who belonged to the female persuasion, who had absolutely no business being in the 82nd Airborne because they just didn't have the physical strength to do what you have to do. Just when you jump carrying with you a thing attached to your leg. That
yes,
thing is what enables you to function as a soldier once you have been dumped hundreds of miles away from any base of support. And these people couldn't even lift that bag. Okay, so this is a case of browbeating and forcing people into doing unnatural and useless things.
yes, and of course now they have the troons on top of it. But look, I wanted to ask you because I've been keeping
They
you a
have
long time.
who do they have? Who
Well,
do they have? What did you say?
well, I'm trying to be polite, but they have, let us say, the eunuchoid persuasion in the military
What's
also
the
lately.
Unicode?
A eunuch, a transsexual, but they have these in the
Why are they
military
talking
now
about
too.
transsexuals? Transsexual. Listen, transsexuals. I am completely opposed to the exclusion of groups,
Yes,
categories that are not relevant.
yes,
Women, transsexuals, or whatever, they can be excellent soldiers. It's a matter of whether they have the actual cultural asset, which is do
yes,
they think like Achilles or they don't think like Achilles. Achilles was very sorry, really truly sorry for the gods, because the gods, being immortal, could never be brave. And
yes,
therefore, Achilles was really, very sympathetic to their plight because being immortal, they could never be brave. And if you
yes,
can't be brave, what's the fucking point of living? That's the point. So
yes.
I know people, I actually know a transsexual guy who is in the military,
Well,
and
they
he's
happen.
a natural born warrior, okay? I don't know
Yes,
what he does in bed, and I don't care, but I know that he's a natural born warrior. The problem with inclusion is not the inclusion, is the fact that this is the inclusion not of individuals who
yes,
should be included, but of categories.
yes, yes. Of
Categories.
course.
Saying, oh, in order, you have to meet a quota. You have to have 17 transsexuals and 49% women, or all that kind of stuff. That is the
Yes,
entirely wrong thing. Look, listen. Uh, in the early 1960s, a woman showed up in Israeli pilot course, all of which were men, and tried to get and become a pilot. So she did the various tests and things, and then she became a pilot. And then she learned to fly, and then she became a combat pilot. Then she became an ace. And all the time she was a woman. She actually got married. She had children and so on. So I do not believe in including categories
yes.
because they claim, we have a
No, of
right,
course.
a quota, a percentage, and
Yes.
also equally exclusion on the same basis.
No, it happens. I think Gaimar of Salerno, wife, was a gigantic Teutonic woman who, rallied the troops to victory on battlefield. It happens,
Well,
yes. But I wanted to
look,
ask you
I'm giving you
before
my
we.
personal experience that shook me up. In the '67 war, I was a
Yes,
young fellow. I was a volunteer, and I was sent to a place called Kibbutz Shamir up in the finger of Galilee because that's where volunteers showed up because the army was facing Egypt and Jordan, the real army, and there were very, very few people there. Well, the only asset they really had for this grotesquely exposed, vulnerable part of the finger of the Galilee, which is a few kilometers across from Syria on one side, Lebanon on top. The only weapon there was in this particular place that was worth anything was a 14.5 a 14.3 millimeter heavy Besa machine gun, which had been flown in 1948 in the War of Independence, but which
Yes.
was a heavy machine gun with lots of belts of ammunition, and which was really effective because you could hit infantry more than a mile away if you could see them and so on, but you could also tear up trucks and you could heavily damage even armored vehicles. So the person who operated this heavy machine gun was a woman who I remember who was rather short, rather fat, and uh, and she was the one operating the base machine gun. And she slept next to the base machine gun, and uh,
Yes.
she used the base machine gun, and she looked everything but like a soldier because she was, I think she was in the late 40s, and she was corpulent. I mean, she was quite fat and so on. And she could
Yes.
not have run up a mountain. She couldn't have climbed the wall or something else. But operating the basic machine gun, she was extremely good. Extremely good.
Yes.
She was very deft because you have to lift the upper part to slip
No,
in
of
the new
course.
belt of ammo.
Look,
Very
I'm not.
deft and very effective and brave.
Yes, yes. I'm not
Relentlessly
saying.
brave.
I'm not saying such specimens don't exist. I wanted to ask you something
They're
because
quite
I've
common,
been
in
I've
fact.
been
They're not
keeping you
even
for.
rare.
Yes, I've been keeping you for a while. I wanted to ask you before we go because at beginning of show you mentioned the unnatural way of life in a place like New York or other extreme crowded city,
Manhattan,
and
Manhattan.
Manhattan.
There's
Yes,
constant noise. Once somebody took me to his penthouse. I get around this penthouse, and there is the roar of this insane insane animal that is Manhattan. I said, "How
yes,
the hell can you enjoy this penthouse? The guy spent I don't know how many millions to buy this apartment with the great penthouse. How the hell can you enjoy it when there's this roar, this endless roar of this monstrous thing?" So
yes.
I'm sorry for people who live in those places, and I don't understand why they do. You
Yes,
know,
but this monstrosity, the states, the mega states of our time, the underlying reasoning for these states to exist is the necessity of these very large conscript armies of the 20th century. And I see this as a kind of prison world. I wanted to ask you before you go again if you see some way out of this. I call it glorious barbarism. You don't need to call it
no,
that.
no,
But
no, look,
is there a way?
conscription. Yeah.
Is there a way back to small aristocratic armies in which a small aristocratic group could defeat
No, I really
and
don't see it. I do not see it. I'm not sympathetic to this whole line of thinking because the people who have military service, let me tell you, the Finns, the Swiss, and now the people like this who have military service or the Israelis. The 18-year-olds wait with great anticipation for the day they're conscripted. And in all these cases, by the way, if the young fellow says, I'm not a soldier, I'm not going to be a soldier, and I'm not going to fight, there's no problem whatsoever. To fight is a privilege. And so they will serve in a non-serving capacity. And if they refuse to do that, they say, I just can't, they just let them go. They don't want people who don't enjoy and service, want to serve, determined. In the in Israel, the boys, especially the boys, but some girls of rich people use the money to pay for special trainers so they can kind of cheat their way into elite forces because they've hired private trainers to train them
yes, I
physically
see.
to be able to get good scores. And in places like Switzerland, if a young soldier refuses to serve, they say, "Fine, just go away." And
Yeah.
except that if you look at the statistics online, and you have how many people in the Swiss Army? Question. How many enlisted? How many under officers, and so on. And you see the enlisted number. There are two numbers. One is the official number of the required serve, and it's like 200,000. The actual number, 250,000. People show up. They use political connections, family connections to sneak into the military. right?
Yes.
People
Yes.
and the Israeli military, on the other hand, has to accommodate a lot of people who are physically weak, unfit, semi-invalid. They have to accommodate them by finding places for them, which is bothersome, where they can serve in a wheelchair, for example, behind their desk or computer desk. And the same thing in Finland. In Finland, 3 years ago, actually, there was the assembly of the fully mobilized army for 2 days in the summer, somewhere or other. And the official number that was supposed to show up was a number like 300,000 or whatever the number was. The number
Yes.
that showed up was 500,000 because people who had finished their obligatory reserve duty refused to not show up and insisted on retaining on unit roles. And so the Finnish government did have to provide their share, the additional weapons, ammunition, and so on. So
Yes.
where you have, that's where the horrible Taiwanese degenerates, where you have a good military service to defend the country against a real threat,
Yes.
then you have enthusiasm. You know, it is the people who have no enthusiasm who continue to do it bureaucratically or beneath contempt.
Yes. No, I understand this. You know Neil Ellis, the mercenary who single-handed saved many people in, I think, Sierra Leone war.
No, I don't actually know, but I lost one of my good men because, as I say, I've been in this business myself. The best man I ever had, Robert Mackenzie. You can look him up. There's a Wikipedia. Robert Mackenzie, I could not employ him sufficiently, so he went to work for some dubious British outfit training the Sierra Leone army, and they gave him a bunch of people to train Sierra Leonese, whatever they are, and the guerrillas came and they all fled, left him alone on the battlefield, and he was killed. So I don't know. At least there are some really good people. Bob Mackenzie was a particularly exceptional character. He had served. He was a young American who served in the 102nd, in the 101st Airborne, 101st, and
Yes.
became invalid, bureaucratically listed invalid. So he went to volunteer in Rhodesia, and he just
Yes.
showed up, and eventually rose to be commander of the SAS, the Rhodesian SAS squadron.
Yes.
Uh, there too. And then briefly went to Africa, but he didn't like apartheid. So then he became a contractor and then worked for me and with me. And he was
Yes.
the best man I ever had. And he died in Sierra Leone, a place where there's been a lot of this type of. This is mercenary work done for the Sierra Leonese government through an internationally approved program. So this is
Yes.
not your Bob Denard kind of stuff.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
but still, it's a case where someone like Neil Ellis could single-handed stop an entire, admittedly very primitive
Yeah, I
army.
mean,
But
of course, listen, if you can't deal with the mob of West Africans, you shouldn't call yourself a soldier. You know.
yes, but I was wondering if you think technology will advance to such a level where independent groups of soldiers who are stateless can defeat large conscript armies. Do you believe
No, I don't
this?
think so. You can't get to that from air to there because you see, for example, serious people work for legitimate governments only, not for
Yes,
private groups. They work strictly within the law. They're not piratical. They have letters of marque. When
yes,
when you work with the permission of the sovereign government of that place, you are authorized to work there. This is a
yes,
letter of marque. This is what people had. A pirate was a gangster of the sea, a thief, a murderer, criminal, and so on, who robbed people. And a privateer was a person who owned the ship and got a letter from his government authorizing him to go
yes,
and hunt the enemy's vessels. So
yes,
today, if you are invited by a government to go inside the territory and they give you an authorization to use all necessary force for the purpose of accomplishing the specified mission of clearing out an area, this is a proper way to do things and not like, adventuring around on
yes,
your
yes,
own and so forth. You have to have a framework. Like
yes,
as I say, the difference between the privateers that did a lot to defeat the Spanish Empire for the British Crown and the Dutch privateers who did a lot for the Dutch Republic versus the pirates who did it for personal criminal robbery. Privateers did very well. They were very well paid,
Yes,
very successful. They had a nice share of what they caught, but they had to share, not everything. And
yes,
in fact, so Walter Raleigh, as you know, ended up in prison where he wrote his History of the World or whatever he wrote. Sir Walter Raleigh was a privateer who had crossed the line and become a pirate.
yes,
I
yes.
don't
No,
think
this.
pirates are good, ever been good soldiers. I don't think piratical people are worth anything.
Yes, no, that could be, but even this idea, letters of marque, is more what I'm talking about. If
Yeah,
if more
absolutely.
governments could make more use of them going forward, but that's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
big
I
subject.
mean, it's not. But
Yeah.
the highest form of service to me is still a national system where all 18-year-olds are called, but the ones who really don't want it are released to go home because you
Yes,
don't want people who are unsuitable to corrupt your unit.
yes, yes. No, of course, this good. Well,
Good.
I've kept you
Good.
for a
I
long
hope.
time, Dr. Luttwak. Perhaps.
قالوا